right, so coming up, non-profit organization Media Monitoring Africa files urgent papers in the Constitutional Court over President Cyril Ramaphosa's failure to appoint an SABC board. Also coming up, fuel prices expected to increase with both petrol and diesel costs due to be hiked in March. Further afield, ballot counting continues in Nigeria following yesterday's general elections. And we also take a look at government's budget impact on the realization of human rights. This is ahead of the launch of Human Rights Month come Wednesday. Well, hello and welcome. If you've just joined us, you're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. We're live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Jam-packed week, it seems, that is ahead of us. Let's take a look at how to unfold. All right, so that top story for this hour, non-profit organization Media Monitoring Africa, the MMA, has filed urgent papers in the Constitutional Court over President Cyril Ramaphosa's failure to appoint an SABC board. The public broadcaster has been without a board since mid-October last year, and in lengthy papers filed before the Apex Court, the MMA is seeking an order to declare the president failed to fulfill his obligation diligently and without delay. It wants the president to appoint a board without any further delay. All right, so on the back of that, other news set to make headlines ahead of a historic occasion in the country's rich cricketing history. South Africans eagerly await their date with destiny in the ICC Women's T20 World Cup final, which is happening against Australia. The T20 World Cup finale gets underway from 3 o'clock in front of what is expected to be a sold-out Newlands Stadium crowd. For more on this, let's bring in our reporter, Reginald Witboy. Reginald, good afternoon. Thank you for your time. Electrifying moment for South Africa, obviously against Australia. Perhaps you can walk us through what's set to come ahead of the final. Hopefully we can raise that trophy.
Well, indeed, Liesl, and we know that it's an historic moment for South Africa, and we know that this is actually the 6th time that they tried in a World Cup, whether male or female. So this is historic for the ladies, seeing that they took us to that Cricket World Cup final that's going to take place later this afternoon in Cape Town at the Newlands Stadium between South Africa and Australia. We know that for Australia, it's their 7th T20 and a 14th across all World Cups. But a cricket match is also taking place here in Kimberley at the Diamond Oval. So we just want to see how spectators will get it right to watch this match that's actually taking place here in Kimberley between the Northern Cape Heat and Eastern Storm. And that score is now standing at 175-2 in favour for the Northern Cape Heat. And I'm joined now by Mark, and he is the head coach of the Northern Cape Heat. Mark, good afternoon to you. You are watching a match here between the Northern Cape Heat and Eastern Storm. 3 o'clock, a historic moment for South Africa between Australia and South Africa. How do you feel, firstly, that we made it this far?
I think it's absolutely brilliant. You know, ladies cricket has been on the up in South Africa for the last couple of years. Sine and her ladies have done so well. I think the whole of South Africa and the whole cricket landscape is so proud of them. Absolutely brilliant. First South African team to make a final of a World Cup. So you're really looking forward to it, So unfortunately, I've got my own game at the moment going on here, but we're definitely going to be watching.
And how do you think we will fare this afternoon?
I think that the ladies have been so competitive. They've got obviously a brilliant spirit in the camp, and they've been so competitive, and there so many new faces in the team in the last year, and so many of them have been so competitive and sort of taken the place of those more experienced players. And and it really seems like they're up for it. And cricket, I think, unfortunately, I think they're probably the underdogs, but in cricket, anything's possible.
And also, we know that we also have women cricket here in the Northern Cape. What do you think? How do they feel seeing that we have a Protea squad there and who is doing exceptionally well? Do you think it is possible even for them to make it that far? Definitely.
I think, and part of our thing here at Northern Cape Cricket is to create heroes. And these ladies have definitely become heroes to ladies cricket out there, but also to men's cricketers. Making a World Cup final, playing in front of 20,000 people, in front of a global audience. I think it definitely gives those heroes and creates hope for young ladies cricketers around South Africa, definitely here in the Northern Cape. Our team has been very successful at the moment. We're definitely on an upward curve in terms of all of our cricket here in the Northern Cape. Our Heat men's team's done well. Our ladies team is one match away from getting promotion to the first division. So we're obviously on an upward curve, and I'm sure the ladies watching that game today are going to watch their heroes play and inspire them to greater heights.
Great. And also, an issue that we can't steer away from or turn a blind eye to is equality when it comes to sport, male versus female. How do you feel about that? And do you think that more needs to be done to create the space for women to cement themselves?
Yes, there is still a gap between the two. I know Cricket South Africa are very, very serious about equality across the board, from men's cricket to women's cricket. And I think so much has been done in the last couple of years to upskill the ladies, to give them the opportunities of the men, and obviously come on a par when it comes to salaries, and the opportunities they get to play at global events and around the world. I don't think we're there yet, but we are getting there. I think the gap has closed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. If you ask any of the ladies players, I think they'll bear you out with that. And I'm pretty sure with that motivation that Cricket South Africa have got, it's going to be on a par pretty soon.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, at this point, ask my colleague Ditswanelo, who is on camera, just to pan to see that Eastern Storm and Northern Cape Heat, they are playing that 4-day match here in Kimberley, and that score now is 180 for 2. Also, Mark Charlton, who is the head coach, saying that more needs to be done when it comes to equality in sport, and he knows that Cricket South Africa is very serious about getting women to prove themselves, and also to also align with the male counterparts in terms of equality, getting the same salary, etc. But also, we know that today, in that historic Cricket World Cup there in Cape Town, he says that those ladies, they are an inspiration to many South Africans, and also for those who are sitting out there saying that, well, I want to see myself also one day in the Proteas women cricket team. But Liesl, today really is all about cricket, and we hope and pray that we will keep that cup here in South Africa and not allow the Aussies to take it with them to Australia.
Reginald Witbooi, thank you for that update. At 3 o'clock, South Africa will be taking on Australia in the ICC Women's T20 World Cup that is underway. Wishing them all the best of luck. Really, Reginald, you said, doing a scene set, in fact, looking at the politics of recognition, looking at issues of equality and equity when it comes to sport, perhaps the strides that have been taken, what more needs to be done. Whilst we continue the long battle, we're wishing all those playing today the best of luck. Keep flying flag high for South Africa. So from one big story to another, we've seen that the Automobile Association says fuel prices are expected to increase, with both petrol and diesel costs now due to be hiked in March. In a statement, the AA says unaudited Central Energy Fund fuel data shows that the price of petrol is due to go up by around R1.20 per litre and diesel by 28 cents. illuminating paraffins also expected to increase by 16 cents per litre. For this and more, Annelien van der Poel, Debt Rescue CEO, is going to join us to unpack further. Annelien, good afternoon. Thank you for your time here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, Liesl. Thank you so much for having me.
It has been a very busy year. We have seen the state of the nation. We're just fresh on the back of the announcement of the budget speech by Finance Minister. We've had South Africa being grey-listed as well. And so we're looking at all these factors, contributing factors, and want us to question, on the back of all of this, what is South Africa's economic outlook currently alluding to at this point? What concerns and challenges arise for you as you analyze it?
Well, I think you've summed it up very well. And then, of course, we've got to throw in load shedding amongst that as well. It's been a tough, let's call it 2 months since this year started. We've seen one of the worst stage 6 load shedding bouts we've had in the last week or so. At least we're into stage 4 at the moment. But the reality is all of these things are placing an enormous amount of strain on the government, on our country, and obviously directly onto our consumers. Cost of living has increased exponentially. We know we've got this NERSA increase coming in April as well. The grey listing is very concerning. It's been on the cards. Talks have been abound for quite a few months already. And looking at what Treasury has released for us, we're looking that this could only be rectified possibly in January 2025. So a possible spin-off we're seeing from the economists is the likelihood that we could be downgraded even further. So there's a lot of very tough situations being faced out there. And, this is going to affect business. It's inevitable that this, things like the load shedding places enormous strain on businesses. It puts strain on anybody who wants to start up a business and, try their hand at entrepreneurship and creating employment opportunities. It's a very, very, very tough situation out there right now.
Absolutely. When we have to translate what you say into reality, how would you, just provide an example perhaps for what the reality of this scenario is having on consumers to date when it comes to transport, fuel, food, etc. Could you perhaps give us a realistic picture of what that translates to in terms of the severity?
I think we have to. Yeah, and I think what we have to also then mention is obviously the exponential interest rate increases we saw last year, and obviously the small ones at the beginning of this year. And, I always say if you look at your budget and you split it into two, in one side you're going to have your expenses. These are the things you have to pay every month to survive, and I exclude your debt from there. So this would be your rent, your transport, school fees, food. And that has gone up because we know that, inflation has been outside of the Reserve Bank's, margins of 3 to 6% for quite some time now, which means cost of living has gone up exponentially. And then on the other side, if you have your debt repayments, with the interest rate increases, your payments there have gone up as well. So the reality is for the average consumer, everything has gone up. If you have debt, your cost to service your debt and repay your debt has gone up on the one side. And on the other side, fuel price increases, cost of living, food, and so forth. It's really placed an exponential strain on the average consumer. Consumers really are struggling. I mean, many of them that we are seeing at Debt Rescue are having no option but to, for example, turn to payday loans. There's more month than there is money, and they're having to look at how do I make it to the next payday? So it's a very, very dire situation out there.
We can't ignore the macro factors that are also taking place, obviously, in the shift in geopolitics. And how would the macroeconomics of a possible global recession also impact South Africa? How's that also going to, look like for us going forward?
Well, we know that historically the saying always goes, if America sneezes, everybody else catches cold. So the reality is, if it happens, we're not going to get off lightly. It's most likely going to hit us, and probably even harder because we are struggling with our infrastructure situation right now. So if they are looking at recession based on inflation, being out of control and those kind of factors. And of course, we're still sitting with the situation in Ukraine that's just had its 1-year anniversary. These things are inevitably going to spill over to us in some way or another. And it's just exacerbated by our own internal, situation where it's just worse.
We heard news that there are fuel prices that are expected to increase yet again in March. Which is this coming week. Diesel and petrol set to increase. Petrol to go up by R1.20 per litre, diesel by 28 cents. How is this expected to further add to consumers' burdens?
Very difficult. The reality is when fuel goes up, whether it's petrol or diesel, if fuel goes up in the form of petrol or diesel, it hits you immediately in your pocket, whether it's, filling up your car or, if you're using public transport, we always feel it from that perspective. But then we have the secondary knock-on effect, because in South Africa, the bulk of our goods are transported by road, which means that if the diesel price goes up, we are inevitably going to see it in the cost of the goods that we buy in the stores, because obviously they have to make up for that cost. So again, just further pressure on our budgets.
It just sounds doom and gloom. And Annalene, I wonder, when we look at expectations from government regarding growth and also solutions to mitigate against this advice, what do you have to offer at this point to provide some solace? What are your expectations as well going forward?
I think, from us as consumers, more than ever, we are going to have to be so strict on ourselves in terms of really closely monitoring our living expenses and our debt, being very cautious before we enter into new debt agreements, really reviewing what we're spending our money on, if there's opportunities to cut down. We're now going to start heading towards the winter months. And as I said, we've got this NERSA increase coming. And we know we tend to use more electricity in winter to warm up. So it's really going to fall on us to take things into our own hands and make sure that we are very, very diligent in how we spend. We really have to be super cautious here. Get creative in our spending, shop for those specials, make sure that you use every opportunity that's out there in terms of what is the shops offering 3 for 2s on items that obviously you use. Try to reduce your travel. If you're going to do your grocery shopping once a week, for example, try and keep it to one centralized point, that you're not driving from one part of town to the other. It really does fall onto us to make sure that we really spend cleverly right now. And that we take care of our budgets, really, really, more than ever. It's the one thing we always pull our faces up when somebody says it, but we have to budget. There's no option for us right now.
It's crunch time. Annalene, thank you for your time with the SABC, weighing in on the back of the expected fuel price increase that's set to take place this coming March. Annalene van der Poel, the CEO of Debt Rescue, also just offering some solutions as we mitigate some of the short and long-term effects that the various factors have contributed to South Africa's economic outlook at this point. So again, thank you to her for her time. So motorists now will cough up more at toll gates from Wednesday as well. This is as of Wednesday, the 1st of March, in fact, because National Roads Agency, SANRAL, is increasing toll gate tariffs by 5% across the country. So the South African National Civic Organization is up in arms and wants the tariffs reduced. But SANCO members picketed at the Makhado Toll Plaza in Makhado Dorp in Mpumalanga. Take a look.
Makhado Toll Plaza, the most expensive toll gate in the country. And the tariffs are going up yet again. From 104 Rand to 112 Rand for Class 1 vehicle or all light vehicles. And nearly 650 for Class 4 vehicle. SANCO in Mpumalanga wants the tariffs reduced, as many can afford the increase.
And we're opposing these tariffs simply because cost of living these days is too high. People are unemployed. Our communities are suffering. When you look both Mtonjeni and Waterfall and Machado, they have become ghost towns. And as such, we are opposing this tariff increase simply because it is the cost of these two towns being a ghost towns. But generally, this is the most expensive toll gate in South Africa, which make it even more difficult for our relatives to come and visit us. So that is why we are against this increase. In fact, we want it to be decreased or completely taken out.
With Class 1 vehicles, a trip from Bombela to Pretoria will cost you over 200 Rand. And motorists are concerned, especially taxi drivers.
I think this thing is going to be work because the taxi drivers, they are always passing here in toll gate. I don't think that one is a good idea that they make. I don't think it's going to work. But we're going to strike.
We're not going to afford the toll gates because everything is going up. Petrol is going up, toll gates are going up. So if you're going just from Belfast to Epwava, it's not even a long distance. So there's no need for them the prices of our toll gate.
In a statement to SABC News, SANRAL says the tariffs are adjusted in line with the Consumer Price Index, and the toll monies are used to maintain, operate and improve toll roads. Dumana Machoho, SABC News, Machadersdorp.
Our credit ratings agency Moody's says it expects South Africa's electricity crisis to lead to lower economic growth over the next 2 years. During his recent budget speech, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana said that government expects the local economy to grow by 0.9% this year, down from 2.5% of last year. He acknowledged that this level of growth is below the pace required to make a significant difference to the many socio-economic challenges that the country is currently facing, including high unemployment. And Moody's then says it expects spending pressures to tackle pressing social ills and long-standing infrastructure bottlenecks to continue to rise.
In a statement, Moody's says Eskom's inability to supply constant electricity will drag the already weak local economy. The rating agency says transferring Eskom's debt equating to 3.8% of GDP from the struggling power utility to government has no immediate implications for the country's rating. Moody's says it included state-owned companies' guaranteed debt in its estimates of consolidated government debt for several years. Government announced it would take on 254 billion rand of Eskom's debt over the next 3 years. Moody's says the debt relief will strengthen Eskom's balance sheet and reduce pressure on its cash flows, therefore allowing it to focus on investments and maintenance of its infrastructure. Economist Yanni Rousseau says the expected low growth and the recent grey listing of South Africa will add to the negativity in the economy, likely leading to a negative view from rating agencies.
It's very possible that this can translate into weaker credit risk ratings for South Africa, which will be very bad for the country because this will have a negative impact. The grey listing will have a negative impact on the South African economy, and things that impact negatively on the South African economy will impact negatively on our credit risk rating. It follows. So this is negative for our credit risk rating.
Rousseau says the grey listing will harm South Africa's reputation and make it unattractive as an investment destination.
South Africa is running the risk of losing its role as the investment gateway into Africa because of bad governance in the country. And being on the grey list will, of course, make South Africa even more unattractive because it will be difficult to use South Africa as a gateway into Africa. I must say, though, one area that has not received much attention is the impact on our neighboring countries in South Africa. I'm concerned about the impact on the other countries in the common monetary area, namely Eswatini, Lesotho, and Namibia. And I'm honest in saying I've not figured out the linkages in my own mind yet, but I'm really concerned about spillover effects to those countries because their currencies are linked to the South African rand.
Rousseau believes the grey listing will lead to a weaker rand exchange rate, which in turn will lead to higher inflation and interest rates. This will likely lead to less foreign investment, which will impact growth and translate into less employment creation. Gloria Sifakomusi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, so it's time for a quick ad break. When we return, Matsidiso Lengwasa is a budget researcher at Section 27. We'll be chatting all things human rights. This is on the back of the budget speech delivered by Finance Minister Godongwana last week. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Right, so the week ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson, continues. Other news set to make headlines this week. We've seen that the Minister of Finance tabled his budget speech last week, Wednesday. At the same time, South Africa was placed on a grey list by the Financial Action Task Force. So on the back of this, the budget allocation for education and the health sector was reduced in the coming financial year. And according to Section 27, this is really going to have an impact on the areas of basic education and healthcare services at large. So for more on the discussion, we're going to be joined by Matsidiso Lengwasa, budget researcher at Section 27. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time here on the SABC.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Obviously, there's been a lot of analysis that has come through on the back of the Finance Minister's budget speech. and some praising some of the proposed strategies, others questioning the relevance and perhaps where to from here. So on the back of that, now that the budget has been tabled, we've seen South Africa's economic outlook and the precarious economic situation we're finding ourselves in. I mean, one can't help question the impact it has on human rights in South Africa. And this is how we perhaps look at it as we head into Human Rights Month this coming March. What do you think is now needed on the back of him tabling his budget speech to mitigate both short and long term to navigate these waters?
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. So from our side, we definitely recognize the precarious financial situation, like the negative global economic outlook as well, but also in South Africa, and we see how that's affecting a lot of people. We're also experiencing 2 concurrent states of disaster, and what that means is that, there's rising unemployment and people are losing their jobs, and so that means there's a dependency on public infrastructure like the health system, the public healthcare system, and the public education, because people can't afford to go private anymore. And so it's very important in times like this, instead of maybe reprioritizing, it's very important that budget decisions and allocating, fiscal policy is centered around human rights. And so we're advocating for, if there are going to be budget cuts or increases to the budget that are below the inflation rate, in order to protect the right to education and healthcare, particularly for us, we are advocating for human rights impact assessments so that they can recognize, so if they cut the funding for teachers, this is how they're going to make up for it to ensure that the most impoverished and most marginalized children are not bearing the burden.
Yeah, because that also impacts the future labor force of South Africa and how we also compete globally at the end of the day, right, amongst the human rights issues. Let's get into that. Before we get there, though, we obviously saw the allocation of the budget going to Eskom, perhaps also looking at the energy crisis. And do you think that was the best approach, given the precarious situation we find ourselves in regarding the energy crisis? If we play devil's advocate, I mean, obviously that is important for operations. And I wonder if resolving that will perhaps also improve the other socioeconomic issues we're facing.
Sure. So we do recognize the very tough position that like National Treasury or the Finance Minister would be placed in with this energy crisis. However, we've noticed like over the past few years, there has been one of the issues that we have is this vicious cycle of taking funding from one area in order to solve what is considered an immediate problem now. And what that means, and I think we've seen that with Eskom and other state-owned entities, is that in future we end up having an even bigger problem. So the best case scenario for a situation like this is that we increase the funding and we finally solve the Eskom crisis and all of that, but then we've taken money out of that could have gone to education. So we have a generation of adults that actually don't know how to read or write or even solve these complex social problems that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings me to the issues at hand. So you've spoken about how the reduction in budget is going to impact both health and education at large. And, with the reduction of this funding, do you think the NHI is actually going to be realized at this point? You speak about recommendations in terms of also health market inquiry. How do you think that could also offer a solution given where we are?
Yeah, I think it's a really good consideration about the NHI, especially that this year there should be progress, like theoretically, that the bill should be tabled this year. And so we would expect that if the NHI bill is going to be tabled this year and we're trying to advocate for universal healthcare coverage, that there would be a budget that reflects that. However, the healthcare budget did not increase this year at all. Like overall, it actually didn't increase. So the value investment in the NHI is actually being eroded. So we have our eyes open and interested in seeing how they're going to realize both, fixing all the backlogs that we've had and recovering from COVID, the healthcare system, but also creating a healthcare system that actually functions in the way that the NHI, because it's quite an ambitious task, but how, we're not really sure how that can be effectively achieved without the necessary budget that goes with it, and also an improved quality in the way that we spend that money.
Yeah, and the trust deficit that also is pervading South Africa at the moment. So whether there's actually political will to want to implement that. So that is definitely something that everyone is actually monitoring, watching with bated breath. I just wanted to read you, because in your statement you call for the budget that protects the constitutional rights for everyone. And given the mammoth task that the finance minister faced, the social issues that we're facing, the socioeconomic issues as well, how is this achievable then at this point going forward?
Sure. So I will also recognize that in some areas for education, especially, there were areas that were protected that recognized that there, like investments in education infrastructure, getting rid of pit latrines, all of those kind of things are really important. And I think just ongoing conversations, so for National Treasury to listen to the Parliament recommendations around gender responsive budgeting, recommendations around protecting that right and like investing in these areas, I think that will contribute to having, and maybe not looking so much short term and like trying to resolve the problem and win political points next year ahead of the election, but rather looking at what kind of investment can we make in education and healthcare that will, protect this right, not just today, but, for the next generation to come.
Yeah, we're heading to Human Rights Month. It's about inclusivity, equity, equality, as enshrined in the Constitution. So where to from here for you? I mean, we also have to look at the systemic issues that got us here in the first place, perhaps also the choices that we made, how we can begin to make better choices as a government, as a country at large.
Yeah, so I think that, from our side, we're going to be constantly engaging with National Treasury and with Parliament, advocating for, the protection of education and healthcare, that right through the budget. But I also encourage, like all South Africans to be more involved and participate actively in understanding the budget and seeing what the implications are, and looking for like public processes, like, the finance, ahead of the budget speech, for instance, there's always an invitation by to air out our views of like what we can do. So I think if South Africans also realize that this is a really powerful way to actually, like, investment and how we allocate our taxes and our revenue isn't a powerful way to uphold that those rights, I think, we can build better and build back better and more on a long term rather than just immediate solutions.
Yeah, the snowflake becomes an avalanche because it gains momentum. This was a conversation started perhaps as we head into Human Rights Month, but I mean, there's so much more that needs to be done, but the strides and the plans have been put in place. So let's see how we can work with the cards we've been dealt. Thank you for your time with the SABC and for sharing those views. Matshidiso Lengoa says budget research in Section 25, really chatting about the impact that the budget allocation is going to have on both health and education sectors in South Africa. Perhaps also this is how this is going to impact human rights and beyond. So again, thank you to her for her time. We'll leave the conversation there. And as we continue to shine a spotlight on the health sector, Health Minister Dr. Joe Butler says that there hasn't been any indication of contamination in water reservoirs. Now, this follows the first death, which was linked to the recent cases of cholera detected in the country. A 24-year-old man from Benoni, east of Johannesburg, with no travel history, is the first fatality to be reported. So the number of confirmed laboratory cases in the country now stands at 5. Patla was speaking at the post-Sona Social Cluster media briefing in Pretoria. This all happened this morning.
The countries in our neighborhood, the major burdened country in terms of cholera is Malawi. When the first cases broke on the beginning of February, there was almost just under 40,000 people already affected in various parts of Malawi, and just over 1,200 people who had already succumbed. Mozambique, also some provinces of Mozambique, more closer to the ones more closer to Malawi as well. So there's a particular corridor which affect the two countries. At this stage, the only imported cases has been the ones for those who traveled from Malawi. We haven't had cases of travelers from Mozambique. The risk of a bigger outbreak is always there because cholera is a waterborne disease, both basically water and anything which you consume, especially something which you consume uncooked. So water, as we drink, and any other fluids, of course. But usually the risk is when the water sources are contaminated, reservoirs and dams and so on. and rivers in cases where people drink untreated water. So at this stage, I would say possibly part of where we may say a bit of protection. We haven't had the cases breaking out in rural areas where people use untreated water in terms of wells and rivers. It's been, because it came from traveling, it's in Gauteng where large majority of people use treated water. So that's why you would find that that's far it's been people in close proximity, in families and those in close contact who share a lot of things, utensils and food and water. So the threat will always be there, but we're still comfortable at this stage that it's been isolated cases. So that's why we say that our environmental health, together with the various city authorities, will always be on the alert, monitoring, especially testing the water reservoirs.
All right, so on the back of that, there are more news and updates upon our return. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In other news now, residents of Jan Kempdorp in the Northern Cape say that there has been an increase in house burglaries within the area. They are calling on the police to patrol the streets regularly, saying that they fear for their lives. Now, releasing the third quarter crime statistics, Police Minister Bagicele said that all property-related crimes increased by 7.2%. The number jumped from just over 90,000 break-ins over October and December of 2021 to more than 98,000 for the same period last year. Burglaries at residential premises increased by 7.4%.
James Brooks has been a victim of property crime. He was not home when an intruder invaded his privacy.
My first point, what I done, I have asked my neighbor, and my neighbor said that he didn't saw anything. And then I take a motion, I go to police station. I call the police have came and take the statement, and come the other police, they take the fingerprints. And then it was end of the case.
Brooks says no one was apprehended for the crime.
And the other people things come out, but mine, till today, it didn't come out. The only way maybe it can happen, I didn't know will it happen, time and I asked, if I ask, there must be a patrol.
Residents allege that some criminals are being apprehended but are out on the streets in no time. They call on the police to be more visible and to invest resources in investigating burglary cases.
Max.
Crime is high. Nothing is being done. Criminals go to our houses and police don't do anything.
We don't feel safe. It's dark and we need assistance from the police to patrol during the night because we have load shedding during the night as well.
Lopen kyk want ons kan nie eers slaap nie, ons is skrik met load shedding ook, dis weer ons skrik aan mekaar nou.
Northern Cape Police maintain that they have plans to deal with property-related crimes.
Police are continuously executing disruptive actions and conducting awareness campaigns in an effort to address property-related crimes, not only in Jan Kempdorp, but in the entire Northern Cape province, to bolster police capabilities and enhance and increase police visibility in hotspot areas. Police are making an urgent plea to community to report any information regarding criminal activities in their communities by becoming the eyes and ears of the police.
The community has also approached the National Prosecuting Authority, demanding that they be harsh on those accused of house robberies.
We would like to put it to the communities that the area has been identified as one of the municipalities where community prosecutions initiatives will be undertaken. As crime and justice system issues involves multi-sectoral hands-on approach.
Residents say until stricter laws are implemented and criminals serve longer jail terms, property crime will continue unabated in their community. Reginald Witboy, SABC News, Jan Kemdorp, Northern Cape.
All right, alliance partners COSATU and SACP have met with President Cyril Ramaphosa regarding his imminent cabinet reshuffle. The president has been engaging and consulting with various stakeholders on whom he should appoint or chop from his executive. Paul Mashatile is expected to be appointed deputy president of the country following David Mabuza's resignation. Meanwhile, some South Africans say they expect the president to appoint competent ministers who will get the job done.
It's become a tradition for the ANC president, who's also the president of the republic, to consult with the alliance partners before making changes to his cabinet, even though it's his prerogative to finally appoint cabinet ministers. As the president is looking at this, there's huge interest from South Africans who have been grappling with socio and economic challenges. Another big challenge is the current power cuts that are hurting the economy. In his State of the Nation address, President Ramaphosa announced the creation of the Ministry of Electricity as he seeks a solution to the ongoing energy crisis in the country. However, alliance partners have rejected the creation of the Ministry of Electricity, saying it's unnecessary.
Indeed, we can confirm that we received an invitation from the President to consult with us on a possible cabinet reshuffle. Which we have given the leadership of COSATU, particularly the President and the General Secretary, to indeed go and meet with the President.
We discussed the principles with regard to the reshuffle. There are ongoing discussions, of course, within the alliance, but we are focusing on the performance of government and the principles underlying that. And later on, the President will then take into consideration our ideas regarding where we think we need to make interventions for his expression to the public based on his constitutional mandate.
Ordinary South Africans have also voiced their views.
He doesn't do something in the next month, naming a cabinet, getting the right people in, getting that diesel gain, getting the Turkish ships going, and at least bring relief. That's what I expect. Otherwise, the country's finished. It's finished. We're going to have a total blackout. It's a nightmare. People are losing their jobs, businesses are going in. He's got to act, and I don't know, up to now it's been a total failure. So please, Cyril, do something.
To be honest, I think we should really get younger people in office because we can't have people from apartheid leading the newer generation. They don't really know what it's like to live in these times.
Okay, I expect everyone to be fired. They've been in there for a long time and they haven't really made anything to improve the life of the average individual South African.
Fresh blood, but effective ministers. Because I don't believe the ministers that they are the right people to be there. And then we can go forward with South Africa.
Meanwhile, President Ramaphosa's pending reshuffle has drawn interest not only in South Africa, but across the continent and other regions, as South Africa is an important player in global affairs.
And we hope that President Ramaphosa will soon announce his cabinet to instill confidence, not only at home in South Africa, but also in the region, as South Africa is a key factor in our region and on the continent.
Speculation is rife that the president will announce his cabinet before the end of next week. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, so news making headlines. Further field ballot counting continues in Nigeria following yesterday's general elections. Initial results from the most unpredictable election since military rule ended in 1999 are expected to be delivered later today, where voting continues throughout the night in some areas and was postponed until this morning in parts of Bayelsa State following violence within the area. A record of 90 million people registered to make their mark, and 3 frontrunners are in tight contest to succeed President Muhammadu Buhari. So perhaps for this and more, we're joined by SABC International News Editor Sophie Mogwena. Sophie, thank you for joining us once again. Yesterday, we obviously saw many, heading to the polls. Now we await for the results to trickle in. Perhaps we could start off with that as it trickles in. When you look at the Nigerian elections, what's the story that's emerging on the continent in terms of how it was conducted, and perhaps also what it's reflecting for Africa at large?
Well, it is one of the most contested elections, particularly when you look at the presidential race. And also, judging from the comments from different influential stakeholders in Nigeria, I'm talking here about people such as the billionaire Ali Dangote, who this morning posted that he has never seen such a turnout since he has participated in voting in Nigeria. You also have the director of the World Trade Organization. We know that she is a Nigerian, and she pointed out also that there were long queues, but she waited until she was able to cast her ballot. And also the fact that there were lots and lots of young people. I think the role of the social media in this election, particularly for a candidate who represents the Labour Party, young people rallied behind him, and he did use social media a lot. Now it is becoming a trend on the continent for those who are struggling, who are not part of the political establishment in terms of history, to use social media and perhaps get support from young people. When you look at what happened in Zambia with Feshelema, what happened in Lesotho with Matikani, but also with partially Kenya with the president there, being able to get support from young people and using social media. And I think judging from what has happened in the West, the largest country in West Africa, the largest country economically on the continent, but also in population, Nigeria, you can see that young people, as predicted, that at some point in time, they will be a factor in terms of the direction countries take. Because when you look at the population on the continent, it is very, very young. And therefore, it is a story of young people on the continent.
Absolutely. And when we look at the precedents that this has set, one is to then turn, the attention to what's also set to happen later in the year. Liberia and Zimbabwe also going to the polls, South Africa in 2024. And what really can we expect from these two countries as part of the build-up to their elections then continue?
Well, when you look at these countries, they differ in terms of the level of democracy, freedom of press, freedom of expression and participation, the level of internet penetration also. So when you take a country like Zimbabwe, you can see they are quite active on internet. But the question is, will the young people decide the future of Zimbabwe with the coming elections? Or it will be left to those who are in the rural area as it is a tradition in that country to decide who becomes the president of Zimbabwe. But I think the citizens of Zimbabwe are watching all these elections. We don't know what are they going to do based on what they have observed. But the issue of social media in particular, it is time that political parties do strengthen their capacity in terms of technology and the use of social media, because you can see it does have an impact. And also when you look at Liberia, you have young people who are very vocal, like it has happened with Lesotho, Zambia, Kenya, and now Nigeria, where they were vocal from start. And you even have a party that represents young people, that is the Economic Freedom Fighters of Liberia. So the question is, are they able to influence and convince young people in that country to support them? But besides that, the normal traditional parties, are they up to the task in terms of ensuring that they are able to convince young people to support them? And therefore, it will be interesting to see what's going to happen in Liberia and also in Zimbabwe, in the SADC region. And of course, next year, it's us. And with South Africa, when you look at the internet penetration in cities, it is quite good. Young people in South Africa are quite vocal on social media, different platforms. And I think the social media, the technology, is going to play a major, major role come 2024 elections.
Well, we'll continue to see how these factors impact dynamics going forward for the rest of the continent. As we shift our focus from elections, there's another big story that is set to be covered by your team this week. We're seeing the visit of Ugandan President. Maybe you can talk to us through the importance of this visit going forward.
Quite an important one. President Yoweri Museveni will be in the country. He is going to meet with President Cyril Ramaphosa. Trade and investment will be on the agenda starting from tomorrow with a business groups meeting, but it is more political. I mean, looking at what has been happening on the globe, the issue of COVID-19, the impact thereof in relation to the economy of the globe, including Africa in particular, but also the war in Ukraine. Last week, President Museveni spoke to President Zelensky of Ukraine, and I think President Museveni will share information with President Ramaphosa in terms of what they discussed with Zelensky. And also you have President Ramaphosa, who's currently the chair of the Peace and Security Council on the continent. When you look at what's happening in the Great Lakes region, these are some of the issues that are likely going to dominate the discussions, particularly the peace and security around the world, the war in Ukraine, the crisis in the DRC, and also not only the DRC, the issue of Ethiopia, it's high on the agenda, the issue of peace and security there. And the humanitarian crisis on the continent. You know that Uganda is hosting a large camp, a constituency or population of people who have fled their different countries in the Horn of Africa, in East Africa, and some from West Africa. And therefore, these are the critical issues. And when I saw this morning that more than 20 Africans, young Africans, perished in the Mediterranean on their way to Italy on a boat. And the Pope, just now, a few minutes ago, literally when I was walking into studio, talking about this. These are the challenges that perhaps these two leaders will discuss, the issue of immigration.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for providing us with that scene setter. Thank you for the updates with what's happening in Nigeria. Again, top stories we'll be monitoring on the international front. Thank you for your time, Sophie Mukwena, SABC International News Editor, weighing in on the diary on the international front. So we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for tuning in. We are back next weekend. Until then, do take care. Have a safe weekend. From myself, Liesl Wilson, and the rest of the team. Until then, it's goodbye for now.